Miles was screaming. His wheelchair was sinking fast in the muddy ditch, camera smashed beside him, while Beverly Thorncroft stood over him, arms folded, her smirk colder than the spring air. She thought no one would see her shove a 13-year-old boy into the mud, but she forgot his father was a retired Air Force captain, and this time the whole neighborhood was watching. Let me drop you right into the moment I realized Paradise had a poison ivy problem. We were standing on our porch, smiles still fresh from the move, when a woman in a lavender visor strutted up our walkway like she owned the sun. And in her world, she just might have. My name is Caleb Rivers. I'm 47 years old, retired Air Force captain, now working as a private security consultant in Asheville, North Carolina. I've led missions in hostile terrain, stood in the path of drones, and handled briefings that could shake the Pentagon. But I wasn't ready for the Battle of Petalside Grove. My wife, Elena, 44, is a botanical illustrator. She's gentle, grounded, and sharp as a thorn when it comes to protecting our family. And our two kids, they're our heart. Miles, 13, lives with a spinal condition. He uses a wheelchair to get around, but that's never slowed down his eye for beauty. Give him a camera and a bed of flowers, and he'll show you the world in a way that makes your breath catch. Lana, 9, is his shadow, a sunflower-obsessed spitfire who calls herself his tripod tech and insists her job is just as important as the artist's. 8 weeks ago, we moved into Petalside Grove. The name sounded like a dream, and at first glance, it looked like one too. Winding trails, rose bushes that looked like they'd been designed by angels, and neighbors who waved just long enough to keep things polite. Elena fell in love with the wildflowers behind our house. Miles called dibs on a spot under a crepe myrtle tree to set up his camera. Lana immediately tried to plant a dandelion army along the fence. Then came Beverly Thorncroft, HOA president, queen of the code book, and destroyer of joy. She's 59 with hair the color of canned peaches and the attitude of someone who peaked during the Reagan administration. Her voice, imagine a southern belle soaked in vinegar, delivered through a megaphone of judgment. The first week she smiled at us. The second she started circling our mailbox like a vulture with a tape measure. 3 days later, we got our first letter written in cursive so tight it could have cut glass. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Rivers, you are in violation of HOA Regulation 8C, unapproved floral displays. The marigolds beneath your mailbox are not on the sanction list. Kindly remove them within 48 hours or face a $50 fine. I read it twice, then turned to Elena and said, we've officially been fined for flowers. Elena laughed. Next, she'll come after Lana's sidewalk chalk. She wasn't joking. The following week, Miles set up his camera by the community garden. He was photographing gardenias in full bloom, their petals catching the morning light like spun silk. That evening, another letter. This one read, tripods placed on common ground obstruct community flow. Violation of Rule 11D. Cease immediately. Elena rubbed her temples. Are you kidding me? His tripod has 3 legs and 0 malice. I tried to keep calm. Air Force training kicked in. Never escalate with emotion. So I called her. Beverly, I said my son's just taking pictures. He's not hurting anyone. Can we let this go? She responded with a sigh that could have wilted hydrangeas. Mr. Rivers, she said, Petalside Grove has standards. We can't have every child turning our gardens into a photo shoot. She didn't say it, but I heard it loud and clear. Your child in a wheelchair doesn't belong here. The next day, a neighbor named Mrs. Davison brought over cookies. A retired florist with a soft voice and sharp memory. She whispered, don't let her scare you. That woman once fined me for humming too loud. Miles kept going to the garden, until the morning Beverly accidentally parked her golf cart inches from his camera setup. Miles had to shift his wheelchair in the dirt to get away. She called that grounds disturbance. A $75 fine followed. I looked at the notice and muttered, is she planning to charge us for breathing next? Lana started keeping a spy journal. She called it her sunflower surveillance log. She'd hide behind the porch column and note Beverly's patterns, how she always carried her HOA tablet like it held nuclear codes, how she sniffed at anything over 3 inches tall, and how she talked sweet to neighbors' faces, then fined them 2 hours later. One afternoon, Miles came home quiet. Too quiet. I found him sitting on his bed, his camera in his lap. He looked up and asked, Dad, am I ruining the park that hit harder than any mortar I've ever faced? I knelt beside him. No, buddy, you're capturing the beauty most people never see. But Ms. Thorncroft says I cut him off. Some people only see what they're afraid of. You keep seeing beauty. His lips twitched, but he didn't smile. Elena was ready to storm Beverly's porch with a petition and a potted cactus. But I held her hand and said, we do this the smart way. Not loud, not fast. Strategic. I started documenting everything, every letter, every voicemail, every fake smile encounter that ended with a fine, because I knew where this was going. This wasn't just about Miles anymore. It wasn't about marigolds or tripods. It was about power, and Beverly Thorncroft was drunk on it. At the next HOA meeting, held in a stuffy clubhouse that smelled like dust and pretension, Beverly stood at the front like a queen addressing her kingdom. She held up her tablet. Ladies and gentlemen, she declared, we must maintain visual integrity. I've received multiple complaints about unsanctioned equipment obstructing garden paths. She didn't say Miles, but every eye turned to him. He shrunk back in his chair. Lana grabbed his hand. Elena gritted her teeth. I stood up. Beverly, I said calmly, my son's tripod is smaller than your rose stakes. He's not a disturbance. He's an artist. She narrowed her eyes. If the Rivers family can't adapt, perhaps Pedalside isn't the best fit. That was it. We'd been labeled unfit, unwanted, unwelcome. But here's the thing Beverly didn't know. You can measure my mailbox. You can find me for flowers, but you push my family. You just activated a mission. The real story starts there. Stick around. Because Beverly's empire of begonias and bogus rules, it's about to meet resistance dressed in camo and carrying a flash drive full of receipts. This is Pedalside Grove, where flowers bloom and justice's roots run deep. Let me take you back to the exact moment the storm finally broke. Because when you push a man's child into the mud and stand over him with a smirk that says you deserved it, that's not a misunderstanding. That's war. You remember how we ended chapter 1 with Beverly Thorncroft. Queen of Pedalside Grove tightening her grip on our family with every petty fine, every backhanded meeting, every whispered accusation. But what she didn't know was that my son wasn't going to stay silent forever, and neither was I. It was a crisp Saturday morning in late April, the kind where the dogwoods bloom like lace across North Carolina skies, and the air smells like fresh mulch and second chances. Miles sat at the breakfast table staring out the window at the rose garden beyond our fence. His backup camera sat beside his plate, clean charged ready. He hadn't touched it in weeks. Not since Beverly's whisper campaign painted his wheels as destructive. Not since the HOA's last letter accused his tripod of being a hazard to community flow. I was sipping coffee, reading over my notes for a training session when he spoke. Dad. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly on the table. I want to go back to the park today, to take pictures. Elena froze mid-stir at the stove. Lana dropped her spoon into her cereal. I turned to look at him. You sure? He nodded. I'm tired of hiding. Lana, ever the ride or die, slapped her palm on the table. I'm coming too. You need backup. We packed up. Camera, tripod, water bottles. Elena kissed his forehead. You got this, sweetheart. And I checked the emergency alert app I'd installed on his phone. It was synced to mine. One tap and I'd be there in minutes. I'm running a drill a block away, I told him. You hit that alert if anything feels off. Got it. Got it. He grinned, and for the first time in a long while, it reached his eyes. Now, while all that was happening. Guess who was prepping her next performance? Beverly Thorncroft. She'd organized what she called the Spring Pathway Beautification Parade, which was just HOA speak for let's pretend to garden while I enforce my power complex. She had her clipboard, her pink floral gloves, and a crew of HOA loyalists who followed her like she was the second coming of Martha Stewart, if Martha was into weaponized regulations. And right at the center of her route, the rose garden, where Miles was headed. I was mid-training demonstrating security maneuvers to a client when my phone buzzed. Alert emergency triggered. Miles Rivers. My heart stopped. Then it roared to life. I grabbed my keys, radioed my old Air Force buddy Reed, and peeled out of that driveway like the tires owed me rent. As I sped toward the park, a single thought pulsed through me like a drumbeat. Please let him be okay. Please let him be okay. I got there in 4 minutes flat. What I saw burned itself into my brain like a scar. Miles was in a ditch, muddy, tangled, his wheelchair half submerged in thick, wet grass. His hands clutched the edges trying to pull himself up, his face streaked with tears, and his camera lying in the mud beside him, broken. Standing just feet away, arms folded like she was inspecting garden hedges, was Beverly Thorncroft. Calm, smug, smiling. And that was when Lana's voice rang out like a cannon. She pushed him. She pointed straight at Beverly. I saw it. She pushed him on purpose. My world went red. I sprinted toward the ditch. Dad, Miles cried out. I'm stuck, my will, it slipped. I got you, buddy, I said, dropping to my knees in the muck. My hands were shaking, but not from the weight, from rage. A rage I hadn't felt since my deployment days. I lifted him chair and all out of that trench like he weighed nothing. Set him gently down on the dry grass, checked him over. No broken bones, scrapes, bruises, but he was breathing. He was safe. Elena arrived seconds later, eyes wide, voice trembling. Miles, are you hurt? I nodded at her. He's okay. Then I stood and turned to Beverly. She didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't even blink. It was an accident, she said, her voice syrupy sweet. He must have rolled in himself. I stared her down. You pushed my son into a ditch, Beverly. That's ridiculous, she scoffed. The ground was slippery. His equipment is always in the way. He's a liability. Behind me, Miles whispered. She did it, Dad. Lana added, I saw her. She shoved his handle. On purpose, neighbors had started to gather. Some from their porches, some from the path nearby. Among them, Mrs. Davison. She walked over slowly, phone in hand, voice calm. I have it on video. Beverly's face paled. I was recording the garden cleanup Mrs. Davison added for the HOA newsletter, but it caught everything. I looked around. Whispers, gasps, murmurs of she really did it, and that poor boy floated through the air like pollen. And right then, I made the call. Literally, I tapped my radio and said one word, go. Minutes later, 3 black SUVs rolled into the cul-de-sac, engines low, lights blazing. Out stepped Reed and 2 of my former Air Force brothers. Still fit, still disciplined, still ready to stand for what's right. They didn't need weapons. Their presence alone sent a message. This wasn't going away. Beverly turned to flee, but I stepped in front of her. Going somewhere you have no right to, I cut her off. You assaulted a minor, in front of witnesses, on camera, and you thought no one would hold you accountable. She flinched, not from my words, but from the crowd. Phones out, recording. Neighbors she'd controlled for years now stood quietly, watching, judging. Elena wrapped her arms around Miles and whispered, You're brave, baby. So brave. Lana held his camera. Even broken, she cradled it like treasure. Reed approached me and said softly, You want us to take her statement now? Let's wait, I said. The police are on their way. And they were. Because while the ditch was muddy and the wounds still raw, justice was already on its way. And Beverly, she had no idea that she just handed us the key to her downfall. Let me pick up right where we left off. My son Miles was safe, but soaked in mud. His camera was shattered, and Beverly Thorncroft stood frozen as neighbors whispered. Mrs. Davison held her phone high, and 3 black SUVs lit up Pedalside Grove like Judgment Day had come early. The look on Beverly's face, that of a dethroned monarch. Still holding her scepter, but realizing the crowd had turned. And this time, they weren't bowing. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Officer Simmons, a man with the calm of a Sunday sermon and the precision of a court stenographer, took it all down. The statements, the video, the photos, even Beverly's trembling excuses. She just rolled in, she said. It's all a misunderstanding. But Mrs. Davison cut in strong as steel beneath her sun hat. No, ma'am, she said. You pushed him. I caught the whole thing. Your arm. On his chair. You shoved him. Hard. Beverly went pale. The officer nodded, then turned to me. Mr. Rivers, he said, we'll be filing this as assault on a minor with physical disability. We'll be in touch for further statements. I looked down at Miles' mud still clinging to his wheels, but his chin lifted. His eyes didn't hold fear anymore. They held resolve. And I knew then. We were done playing defense. Back home, Elena drew a warm bath for Miles. Lana sat beside him, gently wiping down his backup lens. It was cracked but not beyond repair. I changed clothes, then sat at the kitchen table with my old laptop, flipping open the HOA folder I'd been building since the Marigold citation. Every fine, every voicemail, every photo of Beverly inspecting our yard with a ruler. I had it all, and now I had video proof. I emailed it to our attorney, then another copy to the HOA board. Then I drafted a community-wide message titled, "Enough is enough, it's time to act." 3 days later, the emergency HOA meeting was standing room only. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to us in months now sat shoulder to shoulder, some whispering, some furious, all waiting. Beverly sat near the front, her face tight, her hair pinned into a bun that looked more like a battle helmet. She still had her tablet, but the confidence gone. Mrs. Carter, one of the newer board members, stepped up to the podium. "We've received a formal petition," she began, signed by over 60 residents, calling for a vote on removing Beverly Thorncroft as HOA president, effective immediately. Beverly stood gripping her tablet like it might save her. "This is outrageous," she barked. "You're all falling for lies. That video could have been doctored. That boy's father has a military background. This is clearly a smear campaign." I raised my hand. Mrs. Carter nodded. I stood slowly, folder in hand. "Folks," I began, voice steady, "this isn't about grudges or gardens. This is about a grown woman shoving a 13-year-old boy in a wheelchair into a ditch." Gasps rippled through the room. I held up the printed stills from Mrs. Davison's footage. "This is the moment her hand struck his chair." Another still. "This is the moment my son hit the mud." And another. "This is her smiling." You could have heard a pedal drop. I laid the evidence down, turned toward Beverly, and said calmly, "Your reign is over." The vote unanimous. She was out, stripped of title, of power, of clipboard, of her beloved spring compliance manual. Beverly stormed out of that meeting, her floral scarf trailing behind her like a white flag soaked in vinegar. She muttered about lawyers, about countersuits, but no one followed her, because the garden tyrant was finished. But we weren't. We filed a civil suit within the week, citing emotional distress, medical costs, and property damage. The video footage made the case airtight. The district attorney added reckless endangerment to her charges. And when the court date came, she stood before a judge who'd raised 4 kids and didn't suffer fools. "Mrs. Thorncroft," he said, "you were not enforcing neighborhood standards. You were weaponizing power against a child. That is not leadership. That is abuse." He hit her with an $8,000 fine, 180 hours of community service in the very park she once ruled, and 1 year probation. When the gavel hit the bench, Beverly's lips barely moved. "But I swear," she whispered, "I never thought they'd turn on me." That was her final mistake. She never realized. The neighborhood didn't belong to her. It belonged to all of us. The civil case granted us $25,000. Elena and I looked at each other and said the same thing. Let's build something that outlives this. And so, we did. 2 months later, on a bright Saturday morning, Petalside Grove gathered in the park. This time not for a meeting, but for a dedication. Right there under the crepe myrtle where Miles once took his first photo in the neighborhood, we unveiled Miles' Gardenia Gallery, nook, a shaded wheelchair-accessible corner of the park, with mounted camera stands, adjustable benches, a wooden sign that read, "To the ones who see the beauty others overlook, may your lens stay sharp and your spirit even sharper." Neighbors brought lemonade, pound cake, apologies. Mrs. Wilson, who once avoided eye contact, hugged Elena and gave Miles a brand new camera case. "I was wrong," she said. He smiled and nodded. "You're here now." Miles began teaching flower photography workshops to younger kids every Saturday. Lana made custom name tags out of recycled seed packets. Elena passed out homemade magnolia cookies. I just sat back and watched my son laugh again, watched him show a group of second graders how to capture the heart of a lily, watched him lift his chin when someone asked, "Aren't you the boy that lady was mean to?" and heard him say, "Yeah." But that was just the beginning of the story. As for Beverly, her house hit the market before her probation ended. Rumor is she moved to Raleigh. Some say she joined a new HOA. Others say she now lives in a condo that doesn't allow flowers at all. Poetic justice. That park, it bloomed brighter than ever. Because the rules didn't define us. Kindness did. The petals grew wild. The benches were filled. And no one ever measured a mailbox again. Standing beneath the magnolia tree, watching Miles frame a shot of Lana dancing in the lilies, I realized something. You don't need a battlefield to be a hero. You don't need boots or medals or orders. You just need a reason. And mine was sitting in a flower bed, smiling, with a camera in hand. If you felt something in this story, drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. And if you've ever stood up to someone like Beverly Thorncroft, you're a part of this story too. Hit that like button. Subscribe for more true tales of grit, justice, and everyday courage. This is Us Justice Stories, and we're just getting started.